Well, howdy folks, it's Matthew, your friendly neighborhood technician, and yes, you are still looking at the Lexus. Well, let me tell you, I don't know if you've ever heard of the saying opposition in all things, but somebody taught me that, and here recently, let me tell you, opposition in all things, there sure is a lot of opposition in this Lexus, that's for sure. It's been a nightmare of a job, and I'm just doing my best at this point to get this thing back on the road and make it still cost effective for the owners and just please everybody all the way across the board. So it's definitely become something else. So let's dive into it. So if you haven't seen all the other videos associated with this vehicle, we're looking at a 1995 Lexus LS400 4.0 liter engine. When it came to me, it was a mess. The AC compressor on it was completely froze up. So as it was turning, it was making terrible noises. You could actually see some metal shavings being thrown out. It was just a mess down there. So it needed a new AC compressor. At the same time, the belt tensioner was also failing because I was able to reach down and uninstall the belt by hand, which now I can't even move the belt. You can move it a little bit, but before you could reach down and you could grab it and just pull it right up and off and uninstall the belt. So we had a belt tensioner that was failing, and then we had a power steering system that was completely failed. The pump was completely failed at the time, and so there was zero power steering as well. So god awful noise, sounded like the engine was about to blow up, but it was coming from the AC compressor, a tensioner that was not working correctly anymore, and a power steering system that had completely and utterly failed. Also, there were like complaints of starting it up and smoke coming out from underneath the car and stuff like that. So we got into it, and as I got this stuff diagnosed and suggested to replace, I looked down and realized that at 85,000 miles, this vehicle now has 170,000 plus. It's overdue for a timing belt and for a water pump per the factory service intervals. And so I think I figured it was like a little over 10,000 miles overdue. So I decided, since we're already going to have things like the radiator and the fan and all this stuff off and open anyways, we might as well go ahead and service it and put a new timing belt and a water pump and timing tensioners. It also needed a new idler pulley. So a lot of work. Some of it was needed. Some of it was needed due to regular maintenance, especially if we wanted to keep the vehicle on the road for another 100,000 miles. So there's all that in a nutshell. So I started doing the job, got it going. Life is good. I'm happy. Got a water pump that I was kind of skeptical about whether or not it needed to have a gasket. Some of the procedures on this vehicle tell you to use Toyota FIPG, which is form in place gasket, or equivalent, which would be high temperature RTV, that is oil resistant, and then lay a bead all the way around and install it and wait an hour and torque it down and basically form your own gasket. Those water pumps that do not come with a gasket are actually machined accordingly, so you can put your own form in place gasket and then torque it down accordingly with whatever space is in between the machine surface of the water pump and the engine. So if you were to put a gasket in between there, like a steel gasket or a Felpro gasket, it wouldn't torque down right. Now, the water pumps that come with a gasket, they are also machined accordingly, so you can put that spacer in between there, the gasket, and then install your bolts and torque them accordingly. So in the beginning, I didn't think we had a gasket, because when I opened the water pump box, amongst 10 other boxes I had between power steering, tensioner, AC filter, aka AC dryer, and then all the little stuff that we had from pulleys to timing components and all that stuff. You know, I had stuff, you know, nicely laid out and whatnot. But anyways, when I opened the water pump box, I did not see a gasket, so I proceeded with the job as if and installed it with no gasket. When I got about 5 hours into the rebuild, got about halfway done with putting everything back together, I went to my garage and I started cleaning up boxes, and I noticed that laying in between two boxes over here was a water pump gasket. So that really stunk. And longer story short, again, I spent a sleepless night in the morning, and in the end I decided, you know what, you need to go back in, you need to clean up that surface, and you need to reinstall it with a gasket. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. So I went ahead and spent another 5 hours, and instead of finishing it, I went in and re-pulled the water pump, redid the job accordingly with the gasket installed, and got it all back together, got the vehicle started up. Lo and behold, woohoo, power steering works, AC system works, no more terrible running noises. It's got a new timing belt, and it looked like to me like the timing was off anyways, a tooth. At 170,000 miles, just probably wear and tear, who knows. And so, you know, I retimed it and everything, so it starts, runs quiet, runs good, all that other good stuff. I took it for like a 30-mile test drive up and down the street and all around the neighborhood and stuff, and came back. And when I came back, I noticed that after I stuck my head underneath it, because I always, before I say, okay, I'm done, I always, you know, stick my head underneath it and check for things. I noticed that there was a leak of coolant out from the timing cover. Hold on a second, I got a kiddo calling my name. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, get it all back together, get it running great. Life is good, except for it's leaking from behind the timing cover, bottom, where the crank pulley is, and I just couldn't believe it. The only thing that's going to leak from behind the timing cover is going to be the water pump, so I ended up spending a whole nother night that night, broke the whole thing back down, losing all the supplies. Life was great at that point. Woohoo! So anyways, yeah, broke everything back down, and lo and behold, the water pump is leaking. Try to get it all figured out. The company that I did do business with at the time has a 24-hour customer service thing for the business side, and so I got a hold of somebody at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and we talked back and forth, and I sent them pictures, and by like 6 o'clock that next morning, everybody agreed that the water pump is defective. They do not have another one in stock, so they're going to refund money. And I went ahead and kind of reworked the ticket a little bit on this deal, and went in town and I bought a factory water pump. Although it was a little pricey, that's okay. At that point, we just wanted to get it done. Now, what I noticed is when I got the factory water pump, I talked to some guys about it. Between two other technicians, they told me that they've seen both no gasket and one that comes with a steel gasket, not a carbon fiber Felpro gasket, but a steel gasket with RTV already on it. And that they've installed both without gasket and with a steel gasket, and I've never had any problems. I've done this job a handful of times myself before, and I've never used a gasket, and I've never had an issue. But this water pump came with a steel gasket, a really nice steel gasket, and I really like steel gaskets. If I can ever get steel gaskets, that's what I go for, but they're a little bit more pricey. You normally only see them on higher end vehicles and stuff, and so using a little bit of RTV, high temperature oil resistant RTV, and the steel gasket along with the factory water pump, I reinstalled it, got everything back together yet again. So at this point, I've broken the engine all the way down, the timing all the way down, rebuilt it halfway back up, broke it all the way back down. No, I'm sorry. Broke the timing back down, rebuilt it halfway, broke it down, rebuilt it, got the car started due to a defective water pump, broke it back down, and now I've rebuilt it again, okay? And so this time I get this Lexus started. Everything's running great. everything's going good. I'm happy with it. I'm in the process of burping it. Life is great. The heater comes on as I'm burping it, so I know that I'm burping it correctly. And if you read here, it says that you need to run the engine at 2,000 to 2,500 RPMs for 5 minutes. So after letting this engine sit and idle for a while, burping it out and stuff, I'm happy with the way it's running. And I'm confident that the timing job is done. There are no leaks whatsoever as far as the coolant goes. So I go ahead and I bring it up to 2,500 RPMs and go ahead and do that and open it up. And next thing I know, I get this big cloud of white smoke out of my exhaust system. And I mean, it starts out little at first, but the more I run it, the thicker this cloud gets. And at first I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. So at that point, I literally can't think about anything in my head that I would have done that would have introduced coolant into a cylinder, because the engine isn't built like that, other than it might have a blown head gasket. And fixing the water pump, getting the engine running great again. Went ahead and, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Like, I was thinking that. But I was going all over this thing. And so finally I was like, all right, let's shut it down. Because the thing about it is it ran fine. It idles great, runs great. Just if you start giving it the gas, man, it kind of hesitates a little bit and kicks out white smoke. So the first place I decided to go, since I don't have like any coolant in my oil, and the engine really is running pretty decent, and I pretty much ruled out anything with the timing, is I pull my breather off for my intake and I find transmission fluid, a lot of transmission fluid inside of my intake, okay? And I'm just like, what the heck? So the transmission fluid for this Lexus is not your normal ATF. All right, it's special stuff. Okay, and so it doesn't necessarily have the exact same color as ATF. And I'm gonna tell you right now, that right there, that fluid in the intake of this Lexus is the reason why it's kicking out so much black smoke. I'm sorry, white smoke. Although you think it's coolant if you smelt it. One of my buddies was here. He's like, man, that smells like gas or something burning. And I'm like, yeah, that smells terrible. Well, that right there is what you're smelling, and that right there is what you're seeing burning out of the exhaust. And that's why the engine's running a little funky. But where and why is it coming from? Well, the one thing that we did not change, I don't know if you can see it hidden down underneath here, where my finger is. Okay, you see those two vacuum ports right there? The one thing that I did not change, because it was working at the time on this vehicle, and remember, I've already started and ran it about 30 miles, was this air vacuum valve, okay? And it plugs up in underneath the power steering pump, inside of the power steering pump there, and it has two vacuum lines that run to it, okay? One of the vacuum line meets right here on the intake, what I call the intake port hose for your filter housing, that big tube right here, okay? It has a little nipple here, and that's where that's where the smaller of the two vacuum lines plugs into, and then the larger of the two vacuum lines plug right here, and then again down here, and here, okay? Now this is a air vacuum control valve is what this is, all right? And that right there is exactly how and why I am getting what you're seeing, which is transmission fluid inside of the intake. Now that would be something extremely hard to diagnose And like I said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But not only was I getting white smoke out of the exhaust, I was also getting billows of white smoke out from areas of the engine. And so that's because, again, what happens is this air control valve fails, okay? And it fails internally and it leaks internally. And so it sucks transmission fluid into the top half of your engine, and it gets it inside of the vacuum system and burns it out and off of the exhaust. And so that's what gets your white smoke. So it's, there is nothing that can explain this. I obviously took it off and put it back on. You use a wrench and take it off with a 17mm wrench, unscrew it, and screw it back on. I don't necessarily clean stuff like that up. It's basically a little diaphragm, little paper diaphragm inside of there, so you never really stick anything inside of there to clean them or anything. Just take them off and put them back on. That's all there is to it. And then put your new power steering pump on. And like I said, I've already ran the vehicle once for about 30 miles, and the power steering works great. But during the time that I got this vehicle started up and I was burping it out, that air control valve failed. And that's why I now have transmission fluid inside of my intake and burning out of the exhaust. Now, what kind of damage is that going to do? You know what? I consulted a few people. The worst case scenario, I've pretty much given this engine a good top half cleaning. So we're not worried about damage. But if you are a Lexus LS400 owner, you're going to have this vacuum system where you have this port here. You'll have one here on the air intake tube, and they go down here to the air control valve that's connected to the power steering pump. If your car all of a sudden just starts smoking, maybe running kind of funny, and you find transmission fluid, or on this car what's known as power steering fluid, inside of your air intake, it's because it's being introduced into the vacuum system through that valve. Now, I've been told that among some Lexus owners, not among the technicians or professionals, that they'll take that valve out and go ahead and install an oil plug and then cap these vacuum tubes. I don't know. Yeah, I've been told that it works and it doesn't affect the power steering too much, but I just don't know about that. The proper way to fix it is to just get a new valve and get it installed and go from there. And I'll tell you, it's something else. Like I said, I can't explain. There's nothing to it. It's just the luck of the draw. I have enough cars here and I work on enough stuff that it's just gonna go out while it's in your care. So yeah, hopefully I can get that figured out and I can get this car started and get it out of here. So, all right, folks, well, I'll quit rambling on. I appreciate you hanging out with me and listening to me, watching me. If you have any questions or anything or need help with any of your projects, just give me a holler in the comments. We can trade emails, and I can help walk you through procedures or anything like that. So, once again, everybody, thank you for supporting me. This is Matthew, your friendly neighborhood technician, signing off.